After making her AEW debut last week on the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite, Saraya spoke for the first time during last night's broadcast of Dynamite on TBS. She has since responded to criticism of her promo after a lot of backlash on social media. MJF, of course, is now back with AEW. We've got some details on his absence from the company over the summer, as well as Warner Bros. Discovery's reaction to his return. Chris Jericho is the Ring of Honor World Champion, and he will be defending the ROH World Championship next week against one of the greatest Ring of Honor World Champions in the company's history. We've got an update on a possible merger for Warner Bros. Discovery, if that could be happening in the future, and major changes to this week's edition of Dynamite. We'll give you all of the details. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. Of course, last night was another edition of AEW Dynamite on TBS, fresh off last week's Grand Slam edition of Dynamite from Arthur Ashe Stadium. Lots of big happenings were scheduled to be going on in that show. Some things were changed because of circumstances out of the control of AEW. I thought it was an okay show. It was clearly, very, very clearly affected by what is going on right now in Florida. And we must say here up front, thoughts go out to everyone affected by Hurricane Ian. I, like a lot of people, was seeing what was going on there on the news late last night and earlier today. And it's staggering. It's just, nature is unforgiving. And thoughts go out to everyone affected. That is no joke. But going back to Dynamite, clearly last night's show was affected by it, and you could feel it. You could feel it in just the way that, again, the show was broadcast. It just didn't feel, I don't know. I don't know if you could say good. For me, it just didn't really work. Points of that show didn't work. There was good stuff on the show, particularly the main event. I thought was very good, and there were aspects of it I did enjoy, but there were parts that I thought just didn't work. Speaking of which, Saraya spoke for the first time after arriving in All Elite Wrestling last week on the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite. Saraya made her first scheduled appearance on the September 28th edition of Dynamite. Now, on the show, Saraya noted that she will create change rather, in the women's division, and that she is the revolution. She then called out key members of the women's division to join her in the ring, which included stars such as Toni Storm, Madison Rayne, Athena, and Willow Nightingale. Before Saraya could get far, though, Britt Baker and her faction interrupted. Baker ran down Saraya and her name before giving herself credit regarding the prominence of the division. The two sides bickered for a while before Saraya made the upcoming AEW Women's World title match a lumberjack match. Now, Saraya, of course, previously known as Paige, left WWE earlier this year after her contract expired with the company. Despite denying she would turn up in the company anytime soon, Saraya had talks with AEW throughout the summer in the build-up to her debut last week. Now, it must be said, her promo generated quite a bit of criticism on social media. People thought it was sloppy. People thought that it was cringy at points. People just weren't a fan of it, it must be said. The segment was criticised for a variety of reasons, including Saraya appearing to trip over her lines near the beginning of the segment. It felt like at times she was lost. Also, as well, she took a shot at WWE during the broadcast as well, where she said that when she was announcing that the match was going to be a lumberjack match, she said that she spoke to Tony Khan backstage, and now she finally has a boss that listens to her. And that generated quite a lot of criticism as well. I guess the perception being that WWE was really, really good to Saraya, and they were. And this is the thing with that. I do see both sides of the argument on this one. I see the side of the argument whereby it's a case of, does it really matter? It's a pro wrestling show. She said what she said to get a pop. She said what she said to get a reaction from an audience that was quiet because the segment itself wasn't great. But on the flip side, if I was WWE, if I was those in charge there, I think I'd be a bit annoyed by that, in all honesty, because again, and I don't want to bring up too much past, incidents in Saraya's life, but they put up with a lot there. They really did. Now you could argue, the reason they put up with all of that kind of stuff, the behavior and the incidents in her life, was because they were still conscious and wanted to make money off of the name of Paige in WWE at the time that all of that stuff leaked onto the internet, and at the time that she was suspended for popping a drugs test, and at the time that she was injured. She was out of action, I believe, for nearly a year prior to returning in 2017. When all of that was going on, WWE and Seven Bucks Studios were actively in the development of making the movie Fighting With My Family. And at the time, that was generally, or certainly a perception of the reason why they decided to keep her around, because that film was in production. That was going to be a big moneymaker for WWE. And certainly as well, there were lots of big names associated with that film. Obviously, Stephen Merchant was directing it. You had The Rock, obviously, starring in part of it, but also producing it. It was his production company, and it had other big names such as Florence Pugh and Nick Frost also in there as well. It was a big film. Vince Vaughn was signed on, and by all accounts, that's kind of the reason she was kept around at the time. Especially when you go back to that period of time, it was wild what was really going on. As I mentioned, with the stuff leaking onto the internet, which wasn't her fault, but at the time also, she's spoken openly about this. She was having issues with substances, and all of it was just a bit of a mess. So to help her get through all of that, for her to have to retire at the age of, how old was she at the time? 26, 27, due to a neck injury, but she still had several years left on her contract, and WWE paid her throughout the entirety of her contract. They put her as a manager, they put her as a general manager, they put her as a correspondent on WWE Backstage. They in my opinion, treated her very well. For a company that isn't well known sometimes for treating their talent the best, I thought they treated Paige very, very well. So for her to go out and on Dynamite and say that, now I've got a boss that listens to me, I think the boss in WWE, the bosses, listen to Paige, quite a lot. And it was surprising that she would say that, considering that, she'd wrote an open letter before about thanking WWE and said I would never criticize WWE because of how good they were to me. And that felt like a shot towards WWE, and I didn't really get that. And I don't know if that was just because she got lost or she didn't know what to say. She did say at the beginning of the promo, in fairness to her, that she was nervous, but it wasn't a good segment. It wasn't a good segment. It wasn't a good promo. There was a lot of talking just to lead to a lumberjack match, which felt a bit odd. It just didn't work. It really didn't work. And I think that, again, the expectation is that Saraya is going to wrestle in AEW, but if she was just going to be cutting promos, I think there would be a bit of concern backstage, because I think they would say, we can't have that every week, because that wasn't good television. And they didn't feel like any kind of revolution building in that segment. It just felt like a mess, and that's what the AEW Women's Division feels like. Again, that's got nothing to do with the talent involved. You look at the people that were wrestling last night: Toni Storm, Serena Deeb, Britt Baker's out there, of course. You've got Athena, you've got Willow Nightingale. You've got tremendous talents wrestling for AEW, but the presentation of the women's division just isn't good. It's just not. That's the issue. So Saraya did post to social media recently in the last couple of hours or so, saying, quote, some of wrestling Twitter, when anyone makes a hiccup, and there was this gif of people brawling and fighting and all this kind of stuff. Again, I just didn't think it worked. I don't know if she needs to go out there with a script or whatever. If this might be one of the first time she cut a promo without much of a script, I don't know. It just didn't work, in my opinion. But there you go. Let's talk about MJF. Of course, MJF back in AEW after making his return at All Out a couple of weeks ago. Now, MJF is back in AEW after several months away, and he's doing media talking about how he spent his time. Now, this is a new report from Fightful Select. Sean Ross Sapp provides some really interesting details. Now, during the interviews that he's done since his return, he noted that he almost never left his house for 3 months, which is actually mostly true from what Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful has been reporting here. Throughout the process, MJF did not have any contact with most people, including many close friends, until shortly before his appearance, or reappearance rather, at All Out. Now, as All Out grew closer, several members of the roster learned that he would be the Joker in the casino ladder match at the event. After the now infamous promo in Los Angeles, MJF stayed in town to participate in some meetings for Hollywood-related projects, as was reported at the time. But aside from that, he kept a low profile, even though he was seen at Disney once this summer. And it's also been further confirmed that he did indeed film something with Impractical Jokers throughout the summer. MJF steered clear of social media or even going out in public much. That Impractical Jokers report was put out at the time. It does make sense. Of course, MJF's from Long Island. The Impractical Jokers are all Long Islanders themselves. He's kind of tailor-made for that show, especially going out in public. And of course, it's a true TV show, which falls under the Warner Media Discovery umbrella. So that makes the most sense, doesn't it? Now, when it comes to this new contract, we've spoken about this a couple of times here on the channel, and I've got my own opinions on it. Fightful Select are reporting they haven't learned if MJF actually got a new contract, an extension, or an amendment to his deal, but it was heavily implied to Fightful by AEW sources that he's in a much more favorable situation financially. MJF is at least telling people that ask him that he hasn't signed an extension, but that's hardly gospel at this point. Fightful's Will Washington has also learned that contacts within Warner Bros. Discovery, that several there were happy that MJF returned. When Fightful followed up about that, one content pointed to MJF being consistent in being a rating success for the AEW brand. So when it comes to the contract stuff, I know this is kind of going over stuff we've spoken about a couple of times here on the channel, but this is still my opinion, my thoughts on it really, is that I do believe that MJF signed a new deal. I believe it was an extension. And now I don't have any sources. I'm not a scoopster. I'm not going to come on this channel and lie to you. I know a lot of people do that on social media nowadays when it comes to wrestling stuff. But my feeling is that he signed an extension because I don't see the logic in Tony Khan giving this guy more money without him getting something in return. Now you could say, oh, and the thing he's getting in return is MJF coming back to television. But why would you do that? Why would you trust someone like that? I remember the reports prior to all of this saying that MJF wasn't being unreasonable. He understood that if he got a bump in his pay or a raise in his pay, it was going to come with a couple of extra years on his contract. I know publicly he's saying it's going to be the bidding war of 2024, but I think that's all part of an ongoing storyline that they're going to pay off, in 18 months' time. I really do. I think it would be bad business by Tony Khan, in my opinion. And remember, at the time, a Double or Nothing, when MJF was going to get that plane ticket and maybe not show up, we then heard after Double or Nothing, he had that meeting with Tony Khan. It's there that I believe this new deal was sorted out. And I think MJF is going to be sticking around in AEW a lot longer than 2024. I could be massively wrong. Come WrestleMania season of 2024, we could see MJF in a WWE ring. That's entirely possible. So we'll have to wait and see when it comes to that. But we're not done with MJF just yet because there's plenty of stories regarding Maxwell Jacob Friedman. Now, Jon Moxley's hometown title defense against Hangman Adam Page on the October 18 AEW Dynamite could end in 3 separate outcomes. We could see, of course, Moxley retain the title, which is likely. Hangman Page could reclaim the title. He lost to CM Punk, becoming a 2-time champion. Or we could see MJF cash in his Casino Ladder Match chip to begin his first reign as AEW champion. Now, of course, over the past few weeks, MJF has repeatedly teased cashing in his chip at the end of a Moxley match, warning the champion to watch his back at all times. During the September 28 episode of Dynamite, MJF once again floated the possibility of a cash-in following the Moxley vs. Page match in Cincinnati, encouraging both wrestlers to deliver a mighty beating onto each other so he can swoop in and claim AEW's top prize. Following Moxley's victory over Juice Robinson, Page did a run-in to confront the AEW champion. Just as the two men prepared to come to blows, MJF, who watched the match from the skybox, delivered a message to Page and Moxley saying, quote, "Whoa, whoa, settle down. You guys know you're not fighting each other, right? You're just fighting to lose. Because once you two morons get to Cincinnati, I might just cash my chip and become the new AEW World Champion." Now, it must be said also that MJF is actually going to be wrestling. He's going to be wrestling a rare match on Dynamite on next week's show. It will be only his 4th match on Dynamite in 2022 as he faces Wheeler Yuta of the Blackpool Combat Club. Now, MJF's last 3 matches in AEW on the flagship show of Dynamite were against Shawn Dean on January 5th, CM Punk on February 2nd, and Shawn Dean once again on April 13. If you include his 3 pay-per-view matches this year against Punk at Revolution, Wardlow Solo at Double or Nothing, and the Casino Ladder match at All Out, which he didn't really wrestle in. Next week's bout will mark MJF's just 7th match for AEW in 2022. Now, this rivalry, this on-screen rivalry between MJF and Yuta began on last week's Dynamite, on the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite, where Yuta was interviewed about his fellow two Blackpool Combat Club stablemates Moxley and Danielson fighting for the then-vacant AEW World Championship. His interview was cut short by MJF, who proceeded to poke fun at Yuta for his lack of personality and charisma. He also got a bit of a low blow in there about William Regal and his former substance issues. The segment ended with W. Morrissey, MJF's The Firm stablemate, choking out Yuta before MJF struck him with the Dynamite Diamond Ring. Now, it must be said, he also then shoved Tony Schiavone to the floor last week, which was hilarious. It was absolutely hilarious. But this week, Yuta called out MJF for not only striking him with the Dynamite Diamond Ring, but also laying his hands on Tony Schiavone. MJF would respond once again by poking fun at Yuta's lack of presence on TV, saying that Yuta has as much charisma as Joe Frazier, who is dead, by the way. MJF then accepted Yuta's challenge for a match on Dynamite next week in Washington, D.C. Later, during the Moxley vs. Robinson match, MJF, as I mentioned, was seen watching from the press box, but after the match, Yuta ambushed MJF from behind as the two men brawled into the arena. So we're going to get an MJF match next week, which, of course, he is going to win. MJF is not going to lose on his way to becoming the AEW World Champion. Speaking of World Champions, Chris Jericho defended the Ring of Honor World Championship last night, and he will do so once again next week. Ring of Honor World Champion Chris Jericho versus Bryan Danielson 3 is set for the October 12 episode of AEW Dynamite from the Coca-Cola Coliseum in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The two veteran wrestlers have won one match apiece against each other in All Elite Wrestling. Jericho, of course, picked up the victory at All Out on September 4, and Danielson won the rematch in an AEW World Title Tournament bout on September 14. So the rubber match was set up on last night's episode of Dynamite as Jericho vowed to desecrate the legacy of Ring of Honor after successfully defending his Ring of Honor World Championship against Bandito in the main event. Now, I must pause there because this match was excellent. It was a fantastic main event, and I know people aren't happy still that Jericho's the World Champion of Ring of Honor. To me, it makes total sense. I think it's part of the launching pad of Ring of Honor. Whilst there's no TV deal on the table, I think it's Tony Khan's effort to get one is having Chris Jericho be the world champion, in my opinion. Now, after the match, Jericho emphasized that he plans on defeating every champion that has ever held the Ring of Jericho title, and he's going to continue his journey by defeating Danielson in Toronto on October 12. After challenging Danielson to a match, Jericho doubled down on his intention to erase ROH from the history books, saying, quote, "I'm going to destroy every Ring of Honor champion, commentator, referee, and ring announcer," Jericho said just before dropping ROH announcer Bobby Cruz with a Judas effect. It was tremendous. I thought it was hilarious. Now, earlier in the night, Jericho referred to him as the most important ROH champion in history and the most honorable man in AEW, while declaring his title reign as the start of a new era for ROH. Jericho, of course, defeated Claudio Castagnoli for the ROH World title at Dynamite Grand Slam last week at Arthur Ashe Stadium. Now, prior to Jericho vs. Danielson 3 on October 12, the two men will share a ring on next week's Dynamite in a tag team match. Jericho and Sammy Guevara of the JAS will wrestle Danielson and Daniel Garcia. Of course, the match came about after Garcia, still conflicted about his loyalty to Jericho's stable, agreed to team up with Danielson against his JAS stablemates next week. Surely it's going to be leading to an angle. I know the feeling is, he's going to turn on Jericho. I don't think he is. I think he will side with Jericho via force next week somehow, but eventually he will turn on Chris Jericho. Let's talk a little bit about a possible merger. We kind of touched on this, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. There were rumors that Warner Bros. Discovery could actually merge with NBC Universal, which would be interesting for the pro wrestling landscape, wouldn't it? Now, Warner Bros. Discovery CEO David Zaslav, I always struggle with this one, Zaslav has dismissed the idea of yet another merger. Warner Media and Discovery completed their merger back in April, but there have already been rumblings of another major move in 2024. The Hollywood Reporter recently reported that anonymous industry executives were of the belief that Warner Bros. Discovery could be in for another merger with none other than NBC Universal being a strong candidate next year. Slav spoke to Warner Bros. Discovery employees during a Zoom meeting on Wednesday. Deadline reports that during the company-wide town hall, Slav addressed rumors of another merger being in play. Quote, "We are not for sale, absolutely not for sale," Slav reportedly said. During the meeting, Slav expressed confidence in the future of Warner Bros. Discovery in the midst of mass layoffs. Quote, "We have the strongest hand in the industry," Slav said. "We had everything we need to be successful, to be the biggest entertainment media company in the world." Wrestling fans, of course, as I mentioned, are keeping tabs on the situation with Warner Bros. Discovery as AEW programming is under the company's umbrella. NBC Universal has a strong relationship with WWE, leaving many to wonder what could happen if a rumored merger came to fruition, with one media juggernaut having two rival promotions under one roof. Of course, there's no guarantee that AEW and Warner Bros. Discovery will still be doing business with one another in 2024. The current broadcast deal between the two sides reportedly expires in 2023. AEW's success going forward will be a key factor when it comes to time to renew the contract with Warner Bros. Discovery or seek another broadcast partner. I don't expect a merger anytime soon, it must be said. I believe there is actually something in the contract of the Warner Bros. Discovery merger that a merger can't happen until 2025 or something like that. We'll have to wait and see. I think it's funny, the things he was saying in his town hall, that, you know, we have the strongest hand in the industry. Warner Bros. Discovery is a mess. I mean, that merger was meant to be the beginning of a new chapter for them. They did all of these cost-cutting measures where they cancelled all of these projects and shelved a lot of projects as well, Batgirl, etc. But the problem is, when they did that as a cost-cutting measure, it actually tanked the share price, and they lost billions. They lost a ton of money because of it. They only have money to release 2 films this year. One is that Don't Worry Darling, the Olivia Wilde directed thing that's got everyone talking, with Harry Styles and Chris Pine, and apparently it's not great, Florence Pugh. The other film that they can afford to release this year is Black Adam with The Rock. Apart from that, they got nothing going on. Doesn't seem like a strong hand to me, certainly. Now, speaking of Dynamite last night, I mentioned that it was a bit of an odd show. It felt like an odd show. Possibly that was due to the hurricane in Florida. Once again, thoughts and prayers go out to everyone affected by Hurricane Ian in Florida. The images were incredibly horrifying. It really was. Now, as made public by Tony Khan this week, those who lived in the area were not required to attend last night's Dynamite in Philadelphia. Grapsody's Will Washington learned a couple of those absences that led to big changes on the show. Former AEW World Tag Team Champion Swerve Strickland was scheduled to be at this show but couldn't travel to the event because of the storm. His tag team partner Keith Lee was solo, working of course in a backstage segment with the Acclaimed. Another name that was scheduled for the show who couldn't make it was Samoa Joe. On an ROH heavy show from Philadelphia, the ROH World Television Champion was slated to be at the event. Obviously, once we get more details about what changed and segments and plans and run times for the show, we'll talk about it here on the channel. So there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. Let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.